My son said, "Don't bring up her Alzheimer's. She won't even remember this." Margaret Halston remembered more than he ever expected. While Jason rehearsed her decline, she rewrote the trust and erased him line by line. By the time he tried to claim the estate, the documents already spoke for her. He thought she'd forget. Now he's the one living with what she left behind. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. Just tell her it's Tuesday again. She won't know, Jason muttered, just loud enough to slide beneath the door frame and sting. Margaret paused mid-step in the hallway, her fingers lightly grazing the trim of the doorway. The coffee in her mug swirled gently as her hand tightened. She didn't move, didn't breathe too loudly, just listened. Nicole's voice followed, syrupy and sharp at the same time. "You don't have to keep reminding her. Honestly, it's just cruel to point it out. Let her drift." Margaret stepped into the kitchen with a warm smile stitched tight across her face. "Good morning," she said lightly, placing the mug down with a soft clink. "Is it Tuesday already?" Jason's head whipped toward her, eyes briefly darting to Nicole, whose mouth twitched into that practiced smile, the one Margaret used to see on teachers who didn't actually like children. Nicole pulled out a chair. "Of course it is, sweetie. Tuesday pancakes, remember?" The pan sizzled behind her. The smell of burnt butter hung in the air. Nicole pushed a pill organizer toward her, then, ever so casually, palmed one of the compartments and tucked it into the pocket of her robe. Margaret blinked slowly. Thought I had 2 pills in the morning, not 1. Jason chuckled. "Mom, you probably took it already." "I probably did," Margaret echoed softly, sipping her coffee. The bitterness jolted her teeth. She hated it black, but Jason had stopped buying creamer. She didn't say a word, just folded the moment up neatly and tucked it away like a slip of paper in a hidden book. Later that morning, after they'd left for the gym, their new morning ritual, now that Jason worked flexible hours, Margaret sat alone at the kitchen table. She peeled back the bread box's false bottom and pulled out a small, spiral-bound notebook. The pages smelled like ink and lemon cleaner. Her handwriting was still firm, still hers. She wrote, "Tuesday again. Jason said I wouldn't know. I do." Nicole pocketed a pill. "Be discreet." She flipped the page and wrote the date again, just to prove she could. Then she wandered into the living room, slowly, carefully, and noticed something she hadn't seen the day before. The shelves had shifted. Gone were the photo albums with crinkled plastic pages and sticky-backed Polaroids, her wedding, Jason's 3rd-grade field day, their old retriever Max in a cone of shame. In their place were framed portraits of Nicole's family. Unfamiliar smiles, pastel beach shoots, a golden retriever that didn't belong to them. Margaret stared for a full minute, unmoving. Her hands stayed loose at her sides. She wrote again that afternoon, curled in the laundry room with the dryer rumbling beside her. "Photo albums gone. Nicole's mother smiling from my bookshelf. No photos of Max. We'll ask Marla if she remembers." The front door creaked open around 3:15. Jason's voice filtered in. "Yeah, I just need to get the title situation cleared. It's not in our names yet. Her lawyer's dead. It's just a matter of signatures now." Margaret stood frozen at the stairway landing, her shadow tucked just out of view. "I mean, if she even remembers signing anything," Jason added with a laugh. "We'll get it done before spring. I've got a guy coming this week." When he hung up, Margaret made her way back into the kitchen. The house felt bigger now, somehow emptier. The spaces once filled with certainty now echoing back her own silence. In the bathroom, she noticed something else. Her prescription bottle had been refilled. Early. A week early. The sticker was bright, the cap slightly different. She pulled the receipt from the bag. Jason's name. Back in the laundry room, she documented again. Jason refilled prescription early. Did not ask. Must verify dosage. Smells like a setup. She smelled toast burning. Dinner passed in brittle civility. Nicole complimented Margaret's blouse, one she hadn't worn in years, as if she'd chosen it that morning. Jason tapped at his phone, half listening, eyes rarely lifting. After they went to bed, Margaret wandered into the mailroom slot by the front door, flipping through a pile of junk. And then she saw it. A manila envelope. Crisp. Unopened. Her name typed cleanly across the front. Margaret L. Halston. Inside, a folded appraisal request, the company's name printed in small, formal letters. Scheduled visit date, Thursday, 10 a.m. Her heart thudded once, hard. Jason hadn't mentioned an appraiser. She turned off the hallway light, stood in the dark, and stared at the paper one more time. What exactly were they cleaning up the title for? And who else already knew? Margaret blinked at the document without touching it. The table between them smelled like lemon oil and reheated eggs. Jason leaned against the fridge, arms crossed, offering no eye contact, just waiting. She peeled back the flap, slowly. Inside, durable power of attorney. Her name, Jason's name, Nicole's signature already in place on the witness line. "You know I still remember my birthday," Margaret said quietly. Nicole's tone didn't waver. "Of course you do. This is just backup. Think of it like a seatbelt." Margaret glanced up. "You first." Nicole's brow twitched. "I'm sorry?" "You signed something giving me access to all your decisions. For your safety." Nicole laughed, sharp and short. "Don't be silly." Margaret smiled back, wide and easy, the kind of smile she used to wear in parent-teacher conferences with the worst kids' parents. She pulled the document closer, lifted a pen, and began scribbling. Nicole stood. "Wait, don't rush." "There." Margaret handed the signed paper back. Nicole's mouth parted, then pressed shut. It wasn't the power of attorney. Margaret had copied a grocery list onto the back of a coupon mailer and signed it with a flourish. "Need eggs? Bread? Not this bullshit." Nicole's eyes narrowed. That afternoon, Marla arrived with her usual burst of lavender perfume and jangling bracelets. She barely got through the door before whispering, "Why is there a camera above your mantel?" Margaret followed her gaze to the blinking black dot nestled among dusty fake ivy. Her stomach dropped. That hadn't been there yesterday. Marla muttered, "That's a Nest cam. They put them in for babies. Or pets. Or paranoid spouses." Margaret reached for her notebook later, scribbling beneath today's earlier entry, "Camera, didn't consent, kitchen, living room, check bedrooms next." As they sat on the porch, sipping tea, Marla leaned in. "Are you okay? You seem guarded." "I'm afraid I'll forget something important," Margaret admitted, voice barely above the wind. "You won't," Marla said firmly. "But if I do—" Margaret trailed off, glancing at the pill organizer Nicole had moved again. The pink Thursday tab was empty. It was Wednesday. Marla followed her gaze and frowned. "Has she been touching your meds?" Margaret didn't answer, just gently touched Marla's hand and squeezed it. Later, through the kitchen window, Margaret watched Nicole talking to their neighbor, a woman who always jogged with a stroller. Nicole's voice floated in, "She's fading fast. It's heartbreaking, really. Jason's doing everything he can." The neighbor nodded sympathetically. Nicole looked over and caught Margaret watching, then offered a pitying little wave. Margaret waved back with the same hand she used to swat flies. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed and the hallway light dimmed to amber, Margaret pulled an old canvas tote from her closet. Inside, beneath wrapped books and dusty address labels, was a worn key. She slipped on a cardigan and quietly backed her car down the driveway, praying the cameras didn't pick up the movement. A 15-minute drive downtown brought her to a bank with bricks the color of dried blood. The safe deposit room was cold. Metal and silence. She turned the key with both hands, breath shallow. Inside the box, a yellowed envelope with her name in her own script, strong and deliberate, and the year, 2015. She pulled it out slowly, heart pounding, fingers trembling. It was her original will, clear, unaltered. Jason's name still listed, yes, but also a handwritten note in the margin, review annually, do not trust assumptions. Margaret stared at that line, then whispered, "No assumptions this time." She folded the document neatly back into the envelope, but not before sliding a photo of Nicole's new family portraits between the pages. A reminder. Back at home, she passed the living room. The camera blinked once. At the dinner table, Jason laughed as he reached for another piece of garlic bread, butter slicking his fingers. The table jolted as his elbow nudged a wine glass, catching it just in time. Nicole giggled behind her cloth napkin like she didn't want to laugh, but did anyway. Margaret didn't move, didn't speak, just kept her fork poised over the chicken she didn't ask for. The taste was wrong, underseasoned and overdone, like everything had been decided without her. Nicole lifted her glass. To family. However long we get to keep them. The moment clinked hollowly. Jason shot Margaret a crooked smile. Kidding, Mom. You know we're just trying to help. Margaret smiled faintly, eyes not leaving her plate. Of course, dear. That night, while the dishwasher hummed and Jason snored behind a closed door, Margaret sat in her bedroom chair beneath a crooked lampshade, unfolding her original will. The paper trembled slightly in her hands. Not from age, from clarity. She reread the signature. The line, review annually. Do not trust assumptions. The last assumption she made was that love would be enough. The next morning, she told Nicole she was going to a hair appointment. Jason didn't look up from his laptop. Nicole reminded her to wear her scarf, just in case it's cold or you forget. Margaret didn't forget. She drove herself to a low brick building on the edge of downtown, where the parking lot had weeds growing in the cracks, and the receptionist wore sensible shoes. Inside, the air smelled like pine-scented copy paper and the soft wax of old books. The brass plate on the office door read, Daniel Ruiz, Attorney at Law, Trusts and Estates. Daniel rose to greet her. He looked exactly as she remembered from years ago, still had the salt and pepper mustache, still wore too much cologne. Margaret Halston, he said warmly, I wondered when you'd be back. She handed him the envelope. The will folded neatly within. I want to make some changes. He flipped through the pages, scanning. His eyes narrowed at Jason's name. Quietly, Margaret added. No calls. No paper trails to the house. Daniel sat back, fingers steepled. Things escalated? They think I won't notice what's happening. She leaned forward. But I remember everything that matters. He nodded once. Then we'll start over. They spent 2 hours outlining the structure, Jason and Nicole gone from every beneficiary line. In their place, the Whitmore Literacy Foundation and the Marigold Senior Resource Center, 2 organizations she had once volunteered with, long before the word Alzheimer's started showing up in doctors' notes. When it came time for witnesses, Margaret said, There's only one person I trust. That afternoon, Marla met her in the parking lot with 2 coffees and a firestorm of questions. Are you sure? Marla whispered once Daniel left the room. Margaret looked at her without blinking. If I don't do this now, I'll forget the reasons. They signed. Page after page, legal language like armor. Margaret's hand shook a little, not with uncertainty but release. When it was done, Daniel slid the new trust into a sealed folder and placed it into her hands like something sacred. Keep this somewhere only you know. I'll hold a copy in trust, off-site. No one sees it without your consent. Especially not my son. Daniel nodded. He'll never know, until it's far too late to undo. They walked out into the late afternoon sun. It hit her cheeks like warmth she hadn't felt in weeks. That evening, Jason was unusually quiet. Nicole hovered in the kitchen, stirring something from a packet. Margaret hung up her coat and headed to her room, just as Jason called out, Hey, Mom? She turned. What's this? He held up a small, cream-colored business card. It fluttered lightly between his fingers. Daniel Ruiz, Attorney at Law, Margaret's coat pocket. She'd forgotten to zip it. Jason's smile didn't reach his eyes. Who's this guy? Margaret blinked once. Oh, I don't remember. She smiled. Maybe he cuts hair. Jason's eyes narrowed. Nicole leaned out of the kitchen doorway. Do you? He asked, voice cooler now. Margaret looked from the card to her son's face, and for just a second, something like satisfaction passed across hers. "I suppose we'll find out," she said, brushing past him. "You've already told that story, Mom." Jason's voice sliced through the quiet kitchen, louder than it needed to be. He didn't look up from his phone, just kept scrolling, tapping, chewing. Margaret's mouth stayed half open, the end of the memory still on her tongue, the one about the camping trip in Crater Lake when Jason got his arm caught in the cooler and cried for an hour. She'd been laughing gently, stirring her tea, warmth blooming behind her ribs. Now the memory sat flat in her mouth, tasteless. Nicole gave a sympathetic tilt of the head. "It's sweet that she tries." Margaret set her spoon down with care, the clink deliberate. "Of course, silly me." She watched them through lowered lashes. Their comfort around her forgetfulness had become its own performance, one they no longer rehearsed. So she gave them what they wanted. That afternoon she misplaced her keys, let the mail sit unopened, asked Jason what day it was. Twice. Nicole patted her shoulder. "Don't worry, that's what we're here for." By Thursday, they were speaking in front of her like she was already furniture. "We should at least tour one or two," Nicole whispered as they stood in the doorway, assuming Margaret was asleep on the couch. Jason nodded. "The one in Beaverton has memory care, all private rooms." Nicole tapped something into her phone. "She's too far gone to argue, just a matter of timing." Margaret blinked slowly, one eye open beneath the throw blanket. Her hands curled tightly around the notebook hidden beneath her thigh. Later that night, after they left for their walk, she found Nicole standing in the hallway with the office door, eye open, her laptop balanced on one arm, the desk lamp casting a sharp triangle of light across her face. Nicole didn't hear her at first. Margaret stood quietly in the shadows, watching as Nicole slowly fed her birth certificate and social security card into the scanner, flattening each page like she was pressing dough. When Margaret cleared her throat, Nicole jumped. "Oh, just organizing documents. Yours are such a mess." "So you decided to clean them without asking?" Nicole smiled. "They were out in the open. Thought I'd help." Margaret didn't blink. Helpful indeed. The next morning, the driveway was empty. Her car, a white 2011 Toyota Corolla with a humming air vent and floor mats worn soft with time, gone. "Where's my car?" she asked Jason directly. Jason barely looked up from the kitchen island. "You said you didn't feel safe driving. I had it picked up. You probably forgot." "I didn't say that." He turned to her fully now, arms folded. "Mom, remember, last week? You said it was too much. That you were afraid you'd hit a stop sign again." "I never said that." Jason's tone softened, artificially. "It's okay. It's normal to forget. You've been struggling." Margaret stared at him, her voice even. "You sold my car without asking." Jason lifted his coffee mug. "You'll thank me later." But later came fast, in the form of Marla's SUV pulling into the driveway like a cavalry charge. The moment she stepped inside, she scanned Margaret's face and said, "What happened?" They drove straight to the local storage facility. Margaret had already prepaid the unit using the new bank account Daniel helped her open. Together, they packed what mattered: her old journals, a cedar jewelry box, the wedding china no one else cared about, the file with her medical directives, and the original trust, now amended and powerful. "Feels like war prep," Marla muttered. "It is," Margaret replied. "They're just too stupid to realize I've declared it." When she got home, the house was quiet. Jason and Nicole were out again, likely working through options. She stepped into the office to place a bill into the drawer, and stopped. Nicole's laptop was open, humming softly. The screen glowed, illuminating a folder labeled "Final Copy, Us." Inside, the document preview loaded automatically. Margaret could see the header before it vanished as the screen dimmed. Amended Trust, Halston Estate. Jason and Nicole's names were bolded at the top, her hands clenched into fists. They thought she was losing her grip, but they were the ones slipping. "She always smells like mothballs and confusion." Nicole waved her manicured hand dramatically as she breezed past the hallway, her voice lilting, like she thought Margaret couldn't hear from the den. The words settled over Margaret like dust, light but inescapable. She sat completely still on the couch, knitting needles poised mid-row. The television droned with a rerun of Wheel of Fortune, but she wasn't watching. She wasn't confused. She was listening. A few minutes later, Nicole disappeared into the office with her laptop again. Margaret waited. Quiet. Measured. When she heard the click of heels walk away and the creak of the bathroom door upstairs, she moved. The screen was still open. No password. A Word doc glowed in pale white. Amended trust proposal. Final draft. She scrolled slowly, the wheel smooth under her fingertip. Jason's name, Nicole's, as co-trustees, asset divisions listed clearly, and nothing matching her real document, not one of her actual designations. Margaret slipped her phone from her cardigan, angled it just so, and snapped 4 photos, one for the doc's title page, one for each screen of names. A door creaked upstairs. She slipped the phone back, closed the screen gently, and shuffled toward the kitchen. Her smile returned just in time. The next morning, at the First Columbia Credit Union, Margaret sat across from a young woman in tortoiseshell glasses. "I'd like to open a new personal account. No access for family." The woman smiled politely. "Of course. Any particular reason?" Margaret leaned forward slightly. "Let's just say I'm growing selective about who I trust with my groceries." The banker blinked. "Understood." A fresh checkbook, a savings account, new routing numbers, all protected, all under her control. Later that afternoon, Daniel Ruiz called. "It's done," he said. "All major liquid assets are frozen. You're the sole controller. Jason can't move a dime." Margaret exhaled into the receiver, her hands trembling just enough to make her writing waver in her journal. Nicole's version of trust is fake. Real document safe. Bank account moved. Jason shut out. The war was no longer silent. That weekend, Margaret walked into her own kitchen and stopped short. Balloons, a folding table covered in Costco finger food, wine glasses stacked like a mini pyramid, laughter bounced off the walls, unfamiliar and high-pitched. Nicole turned mid-pour, her sundress, floral, and smug. "Oh, we're just having a few people over, just work friends. Jason said it was fine." Margaret blinked. "You didn't ask." Nicole laughed. "Don't be silly. We figured you wouldn't remember. Besides, it's good for you to be around people. Keeps the mind sharp." Margaret looked around. Not one guest looked her way. They were in her living room, spilling brie on her carpet, and they didn't even see her. "I'll just go to my room," she murmured, but when she reached for the knob, it wouldn't turn. Locked. She rattled it, harder. "Jason?" He popped out of the hallway with a beer in hand. "Oh, yeah, I locked it. Nicole put her purse in there, didn't want it getting rifled." Margaret stared at him. "In my room?" Jason sipped. "You'll be fine downstairs." She walked back to the party, cheeks burning under her skin. Marla wasn't here. There was no escape. She stood near the hallway wall, like an unpaid ghost in her own house. A woman in a red blouse approached quietly. "Are you okay living here?" Margaret blinked. "Why wouldn't I be?" The woman tilted her head. "You just seem misplaced. Like they don't see you." Margaret smiled. "They don't." The woman squeezed her shoulder. "I do." That night, after the guests left and the wine stains dried into the rug, Margaret sat in her room, now miraculously unlocked, with a stack of stationery. She took out one of her pale blue cards and began to write. "Congratulations on your new home," it read in her looping cursive. "Hope it brings you all the happiness you've earned." She slipped in a photocopy of her new trust's cover page, the one with Jason's name completely absent. No return address. She sealed it, kissed the corner, and walked it to the mailbox under the dim porch light. The breeze smelled like cheap wine and charred chicken. "Mom's just living in our house. She's lucky we let her." Jason's voice bounced off the garage walls, smug and low, just enough to sting. Margaret stood on the other side of the laundry room door, motionless, holding a basket of freshly folded towels. Her breath caught in her chest like a stitch. Nicole's tone was softer, but colder. "Once it's all officially in our names, it won't matter what she thinks." A single sock tumbled from the pile, landing near the vent with a quiet thump. Margaret didn't bend to pick it up. She turned, walked upstairs without a sound, and pulled the sealed envelope from her vanity drawer. The house, her house, was already spoken for, just not by them. By mid-morning, the appraiser arrived. He was a soft-spoken man in a windbreaker who looked more like a middle school PE teacher than someone licensed to value properties. "You said it's under the M.L. Haven Charitable Trust, right?" he confirmed, flipping through a clipboard. Margaret nodded. "That's correct. The attorney's coordinating closing. You'll speak to Daniel Ruiz if you need anything." The man walked room to room, his camera clicking softly, sometimes whistling. Margaret followed at a distance, her arms folded over her chest, catching glimpses of him snapping photos of the hardwood floors, the antique molding, the south-facing windows Nicole always said let in too much glare. "You've maintained this place well," he remarked as he stepped outside to measure the foundation. "It's rare." Margaret didn't respond. She just watched the azalea bushes swaying against his pant legs as he made his way through the garden. 2 days later, Nicole peeked out the dining room window, fingers clutching the curtain like it might bite her. "Who are those people?" she hissed. "That's the third time I've seen someone wandering the backyard. And the same guy with the clipboard came again this morning." Jason shrugged, pacing with his phone. "They're probably from the HOA." Nicole turned sharply. "We don't have an HOA." Margaret, seated calmly at the kitchen table with a crossword, didn't lift her head. "Maybe they're looking for something that belongs to them." Jason glared. "What's going on?" Margaret met his eyes for a beat too long. "I could ask you the same thing." Nicole muttered something under her breath and disappeared into the hallway. Daniel called later that afternoon. His voice was calm but firm. "The nonprofit accepted. Full cash offer, 30-day close. Title's already in transfer. You just got a hell of a deal, Margaret." She pressed the phone tighter to her ear. "Make sure they get everything. I want no liens, no errors, no loose nails. They specialize in transitional housing for abused seniors. It's the perfect legacy. Quiet, permanent, and legal." Margaret's eyes welled, but she didn't let it fall. "It'll be their sanctuary." "And yours," he said. Jason was watching her more closely now, but still underestimated her. They always did. That evening, Margaret passed by the open office door and saw him typing furiously at his laptop, tabs open for power of attorney templates, retirement facilities, and a Reddit thread, titled, "How to Convince a Parent to Move Out." He was still trying to take what was already gone. That night, the courier delivered the signed, notarized final trust. Margaret held the packet like it was a birth certificate, something alive, sacred, indestructible. Jason's name? Nowhere. Saturday brought a strange silence. Nicole moved about like someone bracing for a storm. At one point, Margaret caught her opening cabinets, as if checking for missing valuables. Jason eventually cornered her by the sunroom. "Are you selling this house?" Margaret tilted her head. "I already did." His voice pitched. "To who?" She smiled faintly. "A nonprofit. They'll put it to better use than you ever planned." Nicole appeared in the doorway. "You're bluffing." "I never bluff. That's your habit." Jason stepped forward. "You're punishing us." Margaret stepped past him like he wasn't there. "No, Jason. I'm remembering what you said. And this is me responding." In her room that night, Margaret opened her journal, hands steady. "The house is gone. But not lost. It's going to women like me. Ones they never thought would fight back." She picked up her phone and dialed the movers. "This is Margaret Halston, confirming Thursday for one-bedroom service. No family assistance. Full pack-out." She hung up, stared at her room one last time and whispered to no one. This was never their house. Margaret stood in the center of the living room, or what was left of it. The air smelled of cardboard, dust, and lemon cleaner. Boxes lined the walls. The antique buffet was gone. The credenza sold. All that remained were baseboards, shadows of where paintings used to hang, and silence. A calm that no longer belonged to anyone but her. She walked slowly through each room, her fingers grazing the doorframes like she was saying goodbye to bones. In the hallway, Nicole's framed selfie, the one she had proudly displayed on the built-in shelf with a label that read "Our Home," sat crooked in the box Jason had left for keepsakes. Margaret picked it up, stared at it for a moment, then dropped it straight into the kitchen trash. Glass cracked. She didn't flinch. From her small desk at the assisted living cottage, Margaret sealed the last of the envelopes. Each one held a copy of her amended trust, notarized, signed, indisputable. 2 were addressed to nonprofit directors, her new beneficiaries. Another to Daniel for his records, 1 to Marla, in case they come sniffing again. She slid the final envelope into the outgoing box for the front office. The name on that one? Jason Halston. Return address? None. Jason was in his office later that afternoon when the first real clue hit him like a brick. A routine property record search, part of the title cleanup he kept putting off, showed the house on Evergreen Lane had been transferred. The owner now read M.L. Haven Charitable Trust. He blinked, refreshed the page, then slammed the keyboard. "Nicole!" She appeared in the doorway with a yogurt in one hand. "What?" "She sold it." "What are you talking about?" He spun the monitor toward her. "It's not in her name. It's not in ours. It's gone. We don't own it. She moved it." Nicole stared. "That's not possible." Jason shook his head. "She's bluffing. She's bluffing." Nicole's voice dropped. "Where is she now?" Jason couldn't answer. Margaret's new place wasn't fancy, but it was hers. The assisted living cottage sat at the edge of a wooded property with wide porches and blue hydrangeas planted near every walkway. Inside, it smelled of fresh coffee and old pine. A bookshelf lined one wall. A quilt Marla had sewn draped over the reading chair. Her photos, the ones that mattered, were pinned neatly to a corkboard above her writing desk. No cameras, no baby talk, no tension. She ate a late dinner, baked salmon, lightly salted, warm apple crisp on the side, then poured herself a glass of boxed wine. A knock came just after sunset. Marla stepped in, 2 plastic cups in one hand and a half-drunk bottle of red in the other. "You're not making me drink alone." Margaret laughed, a full, genuine sound that hadn't touched her lips in months. They sat under a throw blanket and passed the bottle back and forth like girls in their 20s. "Do you miss it?" Marla asked softly. Margaret didn't answer right away. Then, "I miss what it used to be. Before they started rehearsing my memory loss like a performance." Marla squeezed her hand. "You didn't forget the important stuff." "No," Margaret said. "I remembered exactly enough." Back at Evergreen Lane, Jason answered the knock at the door, still in sweatpants, face pale. A man in a navy windbreaker held out an envelope. "Are you Jason Halston?" Jason nodded. "You've been served. Civil petition regarding fraudulent assumption of estate ownership." Jason opened the envelope with trembling hands. At the bottom of the first page, "Filed on behalf of Margaret L. Halston, primary truster of M.L. Haven." Next day at court, Jason leaned over the defense table and muttered, just loud enough for the courtroom mic to catch it, "You remember just enough to be difficult." Margaret heard it from her laptop speakers across the state. She was sitting upright in her assisted living cottage, navy cardigan buttoned, hair pulled neatly back. The sunlight through the window lit the side of her face like a quiet spotlight. She didn't flinch. She simply adjusted her glasses and waited. "Ms. Halston," the judge said from the bench, "are you ready to proceed?" Margaret leaned slightly toward the webcam. "Yes, Your Honor. My name is Margaret Louise Halston, and I am not confused about why I'm here." Jason's leg began bouncing under the table. Attorney Daniel Ruiz stood and addressed the courtroom. "We are presenting clear evidence of intentional estate manipulation by Mr. Halston and his spouse, Nicole Halston." He clicked a small remote. The projector lit up with a screenshot of Nicole's laptop. File name, final copy, us.docs. The document preview revealed Jason and Nicole listed as co-trustees, unfiled, unnotarized. "This document was found on a personal device belonging to the defendants," Daniel continued. "Not only is it an unauthorized version of a legal trust, but the digital metadata shows repeated editing over the last 6 months." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Edited by whom?" Daniel didn't hesitate. Jason and Nicole Halston. Nicole shifted in her seat and pulled a tissue from her purse. She pressed it gently to the corner of her eye. "We weren't trying to steal from her," she said, voice trembling. "We were just trying to protect her. She's been declining. She gets confused." The judge interrupted. "We'll determine capacity based on facts, not sentiment." Daniel approached the evidence table. "Here are Ms. Halston's journals, handwritten and dated. Daily entries for over a year, documenting verbal abuse, early pill refills, unauthorized banking activity, and the removal of family photos. She was aware, she tracked it. And she acted." He held up a small voice recorder. "These are audio files she recorded herself. Names, dates, conversations." He played a 15-second clip, Jason's voice unmistakable. "We'll clean up the title later. She won't even remember." The courtroom stayed silent. Then the judge spoke. "Based on the documentation and audio provided, this court finds that Mr. Halston's access to his mother's accounts is revoked indefinitely. All estate transfers will be frozen and investigated." Jason's head dropped into his hands. Nicole sat still, pale, her tissue untouched now. That night, Margaret sat alone in her reading chair, legs covered by a knit quilt. A pot of chamomile steamed quietly beside her. The silence around her was full, not empty. A soft knock at the door. The front desk aide handed her a thick cream envelope. No return address, just an embossed seal. She opened it slowly. M.L. Haven Foundation. Inside was a brief, handwritten note. "Dear Ms. Halston, in honor of your courage, we've dedicated a bench in our shelter garden with your name engraved. You didn't just protect your own future, you created space for others to survive. Thank you for remembering what they hoped you'd forget." Margaret set the letter in her lap and stared out the window, where wind stirred the treetops. She breathed in, slow and sure. Across town, Nicole's phone buzzed again. Another missed call, another text from her sister, another link. Headline: "Oregon couple under investigation for elder fraud scheme. Trust tampering uncovered." Jason sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand. "This is going everywhere." A sharp knock at the door. He opened it. A man in a windbreaker held up a file folder. "Jason Halston?" Jason nodded slowly. "You've been charged with felony elder financial abuse. You'll need to come with me." Nicole's voice rang from inside. "Wait, what did he say?" The man looked past Jason. "There's also a civil fraud investigation pending. Mrs. Halston, you've been named." Next day, Jason muttered it over the rim of a plastic cup at a backyard barbecue in Tigard, Oregon. His college buddy, Liam, offered a half-hearted chuckle, but didn't reply. The weight behind Jason's voice was heavier than the words deserved. Jason rolled his eyes. "She used to be sharp, you know. Ran a whole library like a little general. Now she barely makes it through a sentence." Liam looked at him. "Didn't she sue you?" Jason's grip tightened on the cup. "It wasn't like that. She's confused." But as he reached for a second beer, his phone buzzed. New alert: account hold temporarily suspended. Unverified withdrawals. Flagged. Jason's thumb hovered over the screen, jaw tightening. Meanwhile, 2 towns over, Margaret slid a stack of paperbacks across the checkout counter with the kind of quiet rhythm only decades of practice could hone. The old skills came back like muscle memory. The Westbrook Public Library still smelled like dust and warm paper. The carpeting was new, but the quiet remained sacred. Her name badge read, "Margaret, volunteer staff in embossed navy print." A little girl with tangled braids stood at the corner of the desk, shyly holding up The Secret Garden. Margaret smiled. "Good choice, one of my favorites." A woman nearby turned at the voice and gasped softly. "Mrs. Halston?" Margaret looked up. It was a grown woman, maybe mid-30s, with kind eyes and a stack of children's books under her arm. "You probably don't remember me," the woman said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I was in your third-period library block in 1999. You're the reason I became a teacher." Margaret blinked, then smiled. "Of course I remember. You always checked out the butterfly field guides." The woman laughed. "You do remember." "I forget names sometimes. Margaret said, "but never butterflies." Later that week, Daniel Ruiz called. "Just wanted to let you know the annuity's active. Set up exactly how you asked. Guaranteed, monthly, lifetime income. No one touches it but you. No loopholes, no revisions." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "That's the first safety net I've ever chosen for myself." Daniel smiled through the phone. "You earned every stitch of it." She hung up and poured herself a cup of peppermint tea, steam curling into the soft glow of her reading lamp. Her fingers didn't tremble as she wrote in her journal that evening, "The woman who once corrected my Dewey Decimals now calls me the Quiet Storm." I'm not sure I've ever liked a name more. Jason, however, was unraveling. Over the next 3 days, his debit card was declined at 2 gas stations. He called customer service and was met with long silences and legal disclaimers. Then the bank called him. "Mr. Halston," the voice said, "several large transactions were flagged under your name, attached to accounts previously frozen due to fraud litigation. We'll need to review these with federal compliance." His chest went cold. That night he got home to find Nicole on the porch, white envelope in hand, face pale. "What's that?" "A subpoena," she whispered. "They're saying I used your mom's credit cards. My name's on the investigation now." "You didn't—" "I ordered groceries. Paid bills. The account was open." Jason stepped back from her. "They don't care." Nicole looked up, jaw shaking. "I didn't sign up for this." Margaret sat at her desk that same night, carefully reviewing her final estate updates. Daniel had sent the documents via secure courier. She placed her initials at the bottom of each page, a quiet full stop to the story of her assets. She added one more page, a handwritten statement. "If they ever try to come back," this version stands. "No revisions. This was the one I made while still whole." She tucked it into the folder, sealed it, and stored it in the community center's legal vault. Just after sunset, Jason pulled into a quiet residential cul-de-sac, heart pounding, headlights dimmed. He parked at the far end and walked toward the little cottage he now knew too well. Soft yellow light glowed from the front window. He stepped onto the porch and raised his hand to knock, but the door didn't open. Instead, Marla opened the curtain and saw him. She didn't wave. She simply closed the blinds. Jason stood there, hand hovering, surrounded by a silence he could no longer manipulate. 2 days later, Jason muttered it under his breath, but not low enough. "This whole trial is a waste. She won't remember it tomorrow." The courtroom mic caught every syllable, and the bailiff glanced up from his seat, jaw twitching. On the screen to the left of the judge, Margaret sat in her assisted living cottage, framed by natural light and soft floral wallpaper, the camera catching every line in her face, every ounce of defiance in her posture. She heard him. Everyone heard him. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Ms. Halston, do you still wish to testify?" Margaret leaned forward. Her voice was clear, sharp as glass. "My name is Margaret Louise Halston. Today is Tuesday, the 14th of May, and I remember everything that matters." Jason's smirk dissolved. Daniel Ruiz stood and paced slowly to the center of the courtroom. "Ms. Halston may be retired. She may not drive, but she is not irrelevant, and she is not a victim without voice." He raised a folder. Inside this file are banking records, trust documents, and sworn affidavits, proof that Jason Halston and his wife Nicole not only tried to co-opt her estate, but also used her identity in housing applications, redirected funds, and isolated her from access to her own resources. Nicole, seated 2 rows behind Jason, folded her arms tightly. Her eyes darted to the gallery, where a local reporter was scribbling notes. Daniel continued, voice low but steady. "And yet, despite it all, Ms. Halston remembered. She documented. She protected herself." The judge turned toward Margaret's screen again. "Is there anything else you wish to say before I rule?" Margaret smiled faintly. "Yes, Your Honor. I was a librarian for 32 years. I organized whole worlds with paper and ink. I may lose a name here or there, but when someone rewrites my life without permission, I remember, I take notes, I file it away." Silence wrapped the room like a tight glove. The judge leaned forward, tapping his pen once against the desk. This court finds in favor of Margaret L. Halston. Full restitution is to be paid by Jason and Nicole Halston. All misappropriated funds are to be returned within 60 days. Damages related to coercion and emotional harm will be assessed separately. Jason's shoulders sagged. Nicole let out a sharp exhale, her jaw clenched. Margaret? She simply nodded. In the hallway, Marla stood waiting outside Margaret's virtual screen like a loyal sentinel. As the monitor blinked to black, she raised her hands in a cheer. "You did it," she whispered. "You wiped the floor with them." Margaret smiled. "Librarians don't forget where the dirt is. We shelve it properly." Marla laughed and pulled her into a long, tight hug. "You're a damn legend." The next morning, Margaret sat quietly in the common area of her cottage, pouring hot water over chamomile and honey. Her hands no longer trembled. The air smelled of toast and wild lavender from the nearby garden path. She addressed an envelope in her clean, looping script. Inside, a donation check made out to Cascade Memory and Aging Center, marked anonymous. In the memo line, "For the ones who deserve to remember themselves," she folded it once, taped it shut, mailed it before lunch. Meanwhile, Nicole was just stepping out of her rental townhouse when the second subpoena arrived, this one hand-delivered. "Housing fraud?" she read aloud, her voice cracking in the middle. The courier gave a clipped nod. "Application falsification, mortgage misrepresentation using non-permissive credit data." Nicole's hands trembled as she took the papers. Her face paled. Across the street, a neighbor watering her flowers paused to stare. Nicole turned and went inside, slamming the door. That night, back in her cottage, Margaret carefully folded one last envelope. No note, just a single copy of the fully signed final trust. She took a black marker and crossed out Jason's name wherever it appeared. Thick lines, deliberate strokes. Across the redacted space, she wrote just 3 words in her own firm handwriting: "Not yours anymore." She sealed the envelope and dropped it in the outgoing mail bin at the front desk. Outside, rain began to fall gently, tapping against the windows like the tick of a clock she now controlled. Next day, Jason sliced open the envelope with a butter knife, too impatient to find scissors. Inside was a thick stack of legal paper, and on top, one page stood out. A redacted copy of the final trust, his name blotted out with deliberate black ink. Beneath the void, 3 words were handwritten in Margaret's elegant cursive. "I remember everything." Jason froze. The page trembled slightly in his hands, but not from the paper, from him. He sank into the edge of the couch and stared down at the letter as if it were an obituary. Nicole walked in from the kitchen, stirring oat milk into coffee she wouldn't drink. "What's that?" she asked. Jason didn't answer. She leaned over his shoulder, saw the ink, the letterhead, the words, and straightened with a sharp inhale. "She sent that to you?" Jason nodded slowly. Nicole set the mug down, hard. "You have to fix this." "She's not bluffing," Jason muttered, voice hollow. "We're out. It's done." Nicole crossed her arms. "Then undo it. I'm not going down because you couldn't manage a woman with dementia." Jason looked up, eyes red. "She's sharper than she's ever been. That's the problem." Nicole stared at him a long moment, then spoke with a voice cold and metallic. "If you don't fix this, I'm gone." At the Cascade Memory and Aging Center, Margaret stood in front of a small circle of 6 chairs, arranged beneath a corkboard titled, "Memory Keeps Us Human." She wore a dark green cardigan, silver pin on the lapel, her notebook open in one hand. "Today," she said softly, "we're going to start with one moment we thought we'd forgotten, but didn't." A woman in her 80s raised a hand and said, "I remember the first time I kissed someone on a bicycle." Laughter rippled through the group. Margaret nodded, smiling. "Exactly. It's not the clarity, it's the meaning." Every Tuesday, she hosted memory sessions, not for recovery, for resistance. One morning after a session, she was approached by a reporter from the Willamette County Herald, a young woman with a shaky recorder and a post-it filled with scribbled questions. "I just want to understand how you managed to do what you did, legally, emotionally." I wrote everything down, Margaret said simply. They thought I was unraveling, but I was weaving a net. The reporter blinked. That's good. Can I quote that? Margaret smiled. You may. 2 weeks later, the article published. Front page of the Sunday feature section. Title: Retired Librarian Outsmarts Family Manipulation, a Legal Battle Against Erasure. Underneath, a photo. Margaret sitting under a tree, open journal on her lap, eyes forward. Jason saw the paper at a gas station and flipped it open with shaking fingers. The headline hit like a second indictment. The woman behind the register narrowed her eyes. Aren't you her son? He didn't respond. Just left the paper on the counter and walked out. That same afternoon, Margaret strolled through the Westbrook Library, now reopened after minor renovations. The stacks smelled like fresh print and lemon cleaner. The spines whispered old stories as she passed her fingers across them. No one followed her. No cameras clicked. No one watched her to make sure she didn't forget what she was doing. Freedom, she realized, didn't come with fanfare. It came in the form of silence. She turned a corner and stopped at a display for estate law and senior autonomy, a section she would have skimmed past just months ago. One book caught her eye. Inheritance Law, When Memory Fights Back. Margaret lifted it slowly, the weight grounding in her palm. The title felt too poetic to be coincidence. She opened the front cover. A post-it note was stuck just inside. Ms. Halston, we saw the article. You are why this edition exists. We'd be honored to speak with you for the next one. R.D. Martinez, Legal Press Northwest. Margaret chuckled quietly. A librarian with her own footnote in legal history. Her fingers lingered on the note a moment longer before she tucked it inside the back cover, like a secret she wasn't ready to shelve just yet. She slipped the book under her arm and kept walking, the shelves around her steady and still. She didn't need to be in control of everything. She just needed to remember who wasn't. She won't live forever. We'll wait it out. Nicole's voice drifted through the cafe's patio like the hiss of steam from the espresso machine. She sat across from an old friend from college, oversized sunglasses perched on her nose, but the worry beneath them was unmistakable. Her friend stirred her drink, eyes wary. You really think that's your best option? Nicole sipped her coffee slowly. She's old, sick. Time is on our side. But time had already betrayed them, and Nicole didn't know it yet. That same morning, Margaret sat across from Daniel Ruiz in his office. The air smelled of leather chairs and fresh ink. I want to add a survivorship clause, she said calmly. Daniel nodded, tapping his pen against the folder. You want Jason completely barred from retroactive claim, even if he contests after your passing. Exactly. I don't want a shred left for him to twist. We can do that, he said. We'll make it airtight. Margaret watched the printer spool up, its hum steady and certain. A moment later, she took the warm pages into her hands. The ink smelled permanent. That evening, alone in her cottage with a soft record playing in the background, Margaret pulled out a manila envelope labeled, "In Case of Obituary." The version inside was outdated, filled with half-truths and names she no longer claimed as family. She took a pen, crossed out the first paragraph entirely, then began rewriting it by hand. Margaret Louise Halston, retired librarian, lover of stories, defender of memory, passed peacefully surrounded by friends who chose her and whom she chose in return. She smiled, folded it carefully, then burned the original in the fireplace, watching the ashes curl and disappear. A week later, Daniel called again. Scholarships Live, he said. First of its kind for Westbrook County. Annual fund for students going into memory care and elder support. Margaret closed her eyes. Use the name we discussed? The Halston Fund, for those who remember to care. She exhaled slowly. Thank you. Across town, Jason's phone buzzed with a much colder message. Oregon Real Estate Licensing Board, renewal denied, pending fraud review. He stood in the hallway of a friend's condo, phone in hand, heartbeat thudding. His last viable income stream had just dried up. Nicole watched him from the kitchen, arms crossed. I warned you, she said. I begged you to stop. Jason threw the phone onto the couch. It was her, all her." Nicole didn't flinch. "And now it's me too." He turned toward her, eyes desperate. "You're not going to leave?" "I already filed," she said. He froze. Nicole walked past him, grabbing her keys. "I'm not losing everything because you couldn't outwit a 68-year-old woman." The door clicked shut behind her. At the assisted living center, Margaret's room glowed with fairy lights strung around the bookshelf. Music played low on a record player, Ella Fitzgerald, soft and unhurried. A knock. Then the door opened, and Marla stepped in holding a sheet cake and 3 helium balloons. Behind her, the center's recreation director carried sparkling cider and paper plates. "Happy 69th, Marla grinned. "You don't look a day over dangerous." Margaret laughed, eyes bright. "You remembered." "I write things down now," Marla said with a wink. They gathered in the shared kitchen lounge. Residents trickled in, some with walkers, some with poems, one with a harmonica. They sang, toasted. And when Margaret made a wish before blowing out the candles, she didn't wish for more time. She wished for more clarity, for those who needed it most. 2 days later, a courier arrived with a slim box and a letter from the M.L. Haven Foundation. Margaret opened it slowly. Inside was a bronze plaque, heavy and warm in her palm. The inscription read, "For the woman who remembered," dedicated by those she protected. Margaret traced the lettering with her thumb. Outside, the wind carried the scent of cut grass and distant rain. She stood quietly, holding the plaque to her chest. She had been erased, underestimated, dismissed, and now she was permanent. Next day, Jason stood at the front desk, palms damp, voice barely above a whisper. "I just want 5 minutes. Please. I'm her son." The attendant, a young woman with a soft blue headband and zero tolerance for entitlement, didn't look up from her clipboard. "She's not taking family visitors right now." Jason exhaled sharply. "Look, I know it's been complicated." She met his gaze, unimpressed. "That's one word for it." Behind her, down the hallway where the sun spilled in through wide cottage windows, Margaret sat by the garden, pen in hand, cardigan draped around her shoulders. Her posture had softened, but her stillness carried gravity. Jason pressed a hand to the check-in counter. "Can you just ask her?" The woman sighed, walked a few steps to the side window, and called gently, "Margaret? You have someone here. Says he's your son." Margaret looked up slowly, blinking into the light. Jason raised his hand in a small, uncertain wave. "Hi, Mom. It's me, Jason. Do you remember me?" She smiled faintly, softly, her gaze warm but unreadable. Then she turned back to her notebook and kept writing. The attendant returned. "She's not receiving you today." Jason stood still for a long second, then nodded. "Right." He turned and walked out. No one stopped him. The door clicked shut behind him like a verdict. Inside, Margaret finished the final line of her journal. "He wanted to be seen, but only after trying to erase me." She signed it with a flourish, folded the page carefully, and slipped it into the back pocket of the journal, then tied the twine around its spine and labeled the cover in neat black pen. "For the lawyer, if they ever come back." She rose, joints stiff but steady, and crossed the quiet lounge toward the community archive shelf. A small box sat waiting there, wooden, lacquered, carved with the word "Legacy" in soft cursive. She placed the journal inside, closed the lid. It clicked with finality. Later that afternoon, the wind picked up outside the window, rattling the blinds just enough to stir memory. Margaret stood by the kettle, fingers gently wrapped around the edge of the counter. There were things she'd forgotten. Where she placed her glasses that morning, the name of the nurse on weekends, the title of the novel on her bedside table. But she remembered why she fought, who she fought for, and who had once called her nothing more than an obstacle. A soft knock broke her thought. "Margaret?" Daniel Ruiz stepped in, blazer slightly wrinkled, as always, briefcase in hand. "Am I interrupting?" She turned, smile warming as it reached her eyes. "Not unless you've started charging by the minute." He laughed, setting the briefcase down on the armrest of a nearby chair. "You know, most people don't keep better records than my own paralegal." "I had a head start," she said. 30 years in stacks and catalog drawers. Daniel sat beside her. I just wanted to tell you this in person. We finalized the last audit. Not a single appeal from Jason. No challenges. No motions. Margaret's mouth quirked at the corner. He finally read the fine print then. You won, Margaret, he said, voice soft. She looked past him toward the framed plaque on her wall, for the woman who remembered. A small vine outside brushed the window glass like a finger tracing the past. Margaret nodded slowly. I don't always remember the details anymore, she admitted. Some days, even people blur. Daniel didn't interrupt. She looked back at him, steady now. But even if I forget the win, she tapped her chest twice over her heart. I'll never forget the reason. Jason's voice cracked faintly through the podcast mic. She's just old news now. The bitterness sharp even under the soft studio mix. He sat hunched in a borrowed hoodie, eyes shadowed beneath a ball cap, the host across from him unusually silent. She wrote me out like I didn't exist, Jason continued, forcing a tight laugh. Everything went viral. People think I'm some kind of monster, but they don't know what it's like dealing with someone who's slipping. The host cleared his throat. Well, to be fair, she documented everything pretty clearly. Your case has been used in 5 elder law webinars already. Jason blinked. What? Yeah. You're a slide now. Case study, cognitive decline and financial exploitation, the reverse narrative. Big talking point in law schools. You didn't hear? Jason's silence said everything. At the Cascade Memory and Aging Center, a new bronze plaque had been affixed to the freshly painted East Wing. The Margaret L. Halston Wing for Memory, Autonomy, and the Right to be Heard. Margaret hadn't asked for it. She hadn't even known until the unveiling, when Marla guided her gently through the hallway, her hand warm at Margaret's elbow. They'd stood in front of the plaque together. Margaret stared, eyes blinking slowly. It's yours, Marla whispered. Every word. Margaret reached out and touched her name. I used to file library cards with cleaner lettering than this. Marla laughed, then leaned closer. You still could. In a brightly lit seminar room at the Westbrook County Courthouse, a probate attorney clicked through a presentation on the projector. Slide 4. When parents outsmart their children, the Halston estate reversal. A younger attorney whispered to her colleague, she documented everything? Even voice recordings? Every day for a year, the colleague whispered back. Old school journaling. She outmaneuvered 2 digital natives. Jason's photo appeared on screen. The room went still. Back at the center, Margaret sat in the corner of the children's reading room, a space she'd unofficially adopted. She wore a pale cardigan with a small ink stain near the cuff and sat in a rocking chair with a thick book in her lap. A little boy, maybe 7, sat cross-legged in front of her, reading aloud with exaggerated effort. The stars were bright, and Mom said, they remembered too. Margaret blinked once, then smiled. She reached out, tapping the top corner of the page. May I see that? The boy handed it over. She turned to the dedication page. For MLH, who reminded me that stories belong to the ones who live them. Her throat caught. Just a moment, then eased. She gently handed it back. You read it perfectly. That evening, Marla stopped by the cottage again, carrying a small safe and Margaret's updated estate file. Final, Marla said, setting it down on the desk. Signed, sealed, and stored. Margaret looked up. You keep calling it that. Well, Marla said, sliding the folder inside the lockbox. We never know what a next chapter looks like, but I want your last one to stay exactly as you wrote it. Margaret's eyes softened. Thank you. Marla turned the key in the lock and slipped it into her pocket. We're not here because of blood. We're here because of choices. Outside, the wind rustled the garden just beyond the porch rail. Far away, in a town where no one knew her name, Nicole finished packing the last of her things into a rental SUV. She slammed the trunk, checked her sunglasses in the rear view, and didn't look back. Her realtor had warned her, no one wants to work with you now, not after that article. She left anyway. Sometime in the early morning, Margaret stirred in bed. Light pushed softly through the curtains, brushing her cheeks. She blinked at the ceiling, confused for a moment. The walls looked familiar, but blank. "What day is it?" she whispered aloud. Her voice cracked slightly. She sat up, slow, unsure. Then her eyes fell on the nightstand, a photo of her and Marla in front of the garden plaque. Another of the little boy in the reading room, beaming with a missing tooth. A single card leaned against the lamp. "You are loved, even when you don't remember why." Margaret smiled faintly. She might have forgotten the day, but she knew she was not forgotten. In a quiet cottage surrounded by lavender and rain-wet stone, Margaret lit a single beeswax candle. The flame flickered gently, casting a soft gold circle across the desk. She reached for her worn leather journal, the same one that had held secrets, warnings, and truths, and opened it for the final time. She traced her fingers over a familiar line written months earlier, the ink now slightly faded. "They thought I wouldn't remember, but I did." She stared at the sentence a moment longer, then turned to the last blank page. Her pen hovered above the paper like a breath before a confession. In a quiet manila envelope labeled simply "For Daniel," she placed a letter, handwritten, sealed with wax, the kind librarians used for rare document preservation. Inside, the instructions were clear. No funeral, no family, just the garden, the bench, and whoever chooses to be there. No eulogies, just stories. She addressed it with Daniel's name and slipped it into the safe Marla had given her. Right. Beside the final estate document and a copy of the journal she'd labeled "Case Log, Reclaimed." Weeks later, on a sun-washed morning stitched with birdsong, the Memory Center held a small gathering beneath the garden arbor. Marla stood beside a stone bench engraved with Margaret's name, her hand pressed lightly to the top as people began to arrive: neighbors, nurses, old library patrons, students now grown. One brought a book Margaret had recommended in 3rd grade, another brought a copy of the article, now laminated, and someone brought wild roses, clipped from Margaret's old garden, grown again behind the non-profit shelter. There were no speeches, only quiet stories whispered in the sun. Jason received no call, no letter, no mention in the local paper. When he later searched the obituary section and found nothing, he called Daniel Ruiz's office. The assistant placed him on hold, then returned a moment later. "There's nothing on file for you, Mr. Halston." Jason's voice cracked. "She didn't leave anything? Not even a note?" "She left everything," the assistant replied evenly. "Just not to you." Daniel followed Margaret's instructions precisely. He donated the remaining estate, the last of the house sale funds, untouched interest, and her journal copyrights, to an organization called Guardianship Futures, which provided legal defense for seniors facing coercion and abuse. He also submitted her case journal, with Margaret's blessing, to a national elder law publication. It was accepted as a teaching tool. The file was retitled "The Halston Doctrine: How One Woman Wrote Her Own Justice." Inside the Westbrook Public Library, a small bronze bookend was placed on a corner shelf, a quiet tribute from the staff who still remembered her shelving poetry by instinct, correcting ISBNs by memory. The plaque beneath it read, "For Margaret L. Halston, who remembered what mattered even when others hoped she wouldn't." In the days that followed the bench unveiling, Marla returned to Margaret's cottage and unlocked the safe. Inside was the letter, the duplicate journal, and a second, much smaller envelope addressed to her. "Thank you for standing beside me when I wasn't sure I was still there. Keep going. Help someone else do the same." Marla read it once, then held it to her heart. "I will," she whispered. "I promise." And on the final page of Margaret's journal, beneath a swirl of clean ink, no tremor in sight, she had written one last line before closing the cover. "Some memories fade, but justice never does." She underlined it once, then gently closed the book, blew out the candle, and let the smoke curl upward. Soft, quiet, but impossible to ignore.